The SNP landslide in Thursday's election has rewritten the political rulebook and thrown up many intriguing questions. Well, yesterday we had the appointment of the new Scottish Secretary and his shadow. With only one Tory MP and one Labour MP in Scotland, the posts have gone to David Mundell and Ian Murray, respectively. We'll speak to David Mundell in the next hour, but first let's speak to Labour's new shadow Scottish Secretary, Ian Murray. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Gary. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. How can you represent Scotland's interests adequately at Westminster when you are the sole Labour MP?
Well, it's about working in solidarity with colleagues across the United Kingdom. We have 232 Labour MPs across the United Kingdom, and I'll be fighting tooth and nail for Scotland's interests against this Conservative government, but also defending Scotland's interests against what we may be seeing as full fiscal autonomy coming forward from both the Conservatives and the SNP.
So will you be working closely with the SNP, given that they have 56 members to your one?
Well, we'll be working closely with anyone who wants to share our agenda. I've opposed the Conservative Party all my life. We opposed the Conservative Party in the last 5 years and will continue to do so.
So will you be reaching out to the SNP?
Well, these are all questions that will have to be taken forward. Obviously, if we have a shared agenda, we'll be using that shared agenda. No doubt we will be voting in the same lobbies more often than not. But this is about a Labour Party who's going through a process of renewal, who'll be opposing this Conservative Party from day one. We'll be making sure that I'm standing up for Scotland's interests, whether that be in the same Scotland's interests that the SNP wish to do, or whether or not I'm opposing them as well in terms of full fiscal autonomy and some of their constitutional agenda.
But in terms of standing up for Scotland, as you say, then given that Scotland gave such a big mandate to the SNP, is it not in some way your responsibility to reach out to those 56 MPs and try and work more closely with them?
Well, I'm a Democrat, and the Scottish people spoke on Thursday and did give a huge mandate to the SNP. They have 56 MPs, as you have said, but this is also about the Labour Party renewing, about having a strong Scottish Labour Party agenda, a strong Scottish Labour Party narrative. I'm there to do that.
But there isn't a strong Scottish Labour Party at Westminster. That's the point, isn't it?
Well, there's a strong Labour Party at Westminster, and our values haven't changed, our principles haven't changed, and we'll be using those values and principles of social justice, of equality, of making sure the next generation does better than the current one, and of aspiration. And that's what we'll be renewing, that's what the programme will be taking forward, and I'm quite excited about it. And I think we should be looking at being a strong opposition to the Conservative Party, working very hard on that strong opposition and standing up for the voice of Scotland from a Scottish Labour Party perspective.
You've told us where you might work in opposition to the SNP on full fiscal autonomy, but one area where surely you can work with them in harmony is on the renewal of Trident, because you have said that that is something that you would oppose. Are you going to try and persuade your Labour colleagues to look at this in the same way as you do?
Well, the Labour Party policy is quite clear on Trident, and that's to support the renewal. It's not an open secret. It's very much an open secret. I have for many, many years been against the renewal of Trident. We will be having those discussions as we go through the renewal of the party in terms of what our agenda will be, and we'll cross those bridges when we come to it. All these discussions happen. We're only a few hours, a few days after the close of the polls in a huge general election. Let's just take some time to reflect, take some time to rebuild the party, and just take some time to see what happened during the general election. And all these things will now come to the fore and be part of those discussions. The MSP group met yesterday with the leadership and had a long meeting about the general election. So let's just see what happens.
But would you like to see your colleagues at Westminster come on board with your position and not renew Trident?
Well, there's a whole number of positions. We're a broad church of a party where the Labour movement across the UK and across Scotland involves the affiliates, it involves the trade union movement, it involves a very active Labour Party membership.
But you're on
absolutely.
But you're on the front bench, aren't you? So you have a strong voice as a front bench spokesman, as a member of the shadow cabinet. At those shadow cabinet meetings, will you be arguing for the Labour Party to shift its position and not renew Trident?
Well, Gary, at the start of this interview you were implying I didn't have a strong voice, and now you're implying I do have a strong voice. Let's just take some time to reflect. I've been in this job now for a little less than a day. I think it's important that we look at what the general election threw up, we reflect on what it threw up, and we come to a conclusion on how we renew the Labour Party and the Scottish Labour Party, because the bottom line is here that the UK and Scotland needs an incredibly strong Labour Party to oppose, to scrutinise and to put forward a positive agenda of hope and aspiration for both Scotland and the United Kingdom, and that's the direction we'll all be going in, and that's the direction of the discussion we'll be having at Shadow Cabinet.
But when it comes to collective responsibility within the Shadow Cabinet, when the issue of Trident goes before a vote in the House of Commons, what do you do?
Well, we'll have a look at that when that discussion actually happens. We've
Well, but it's a point of
only had
principle,
one
surely, for
shadow
you.
cabinet meeting yesterday, of which we discussed various items, and the Scottish group met yesterday and discussed various items, mainly concentrating around the general election and analysing what was there. But I'm optimistic for the future that we can put a positive programme together for hope and aspiration.
Well, and
for
I'm sure that's the
looking at
case,
our
but I'm
key
asking you
values,
quite specifically about the renewal of Trident. I wonder what you do, given that you have said publicly that you're against the renewal of Trident, but there is this issue of collective responsibility within the shadow cabinet. What do you do if there is a vote in the Commons?
Well, we'll cross that bridge when we haven't had those discussions yet, Gary.
But it's not about discussions.
It's
about your position. It's not about
discussions.
discussions within the Labour Party. It's about your position. What do you do if there is a vote on this in the Commons?
Well, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it, when we've had those discussions.
So you may not vote against it?
Well, Gary, I've said I wouldn't, quite clearly and quite publicly said both to my local electorate and others, that I wouldn't support the renewal of Trident. My position, my personal position hasn't changed, and my personal position is well known. But the important thing is here that we reflect on the results of the general election on Thursday. We come forward with a positive programme for change, and we oppose and scrutinise with every single fibre that we've got this Conservative government, and we defend Scotland's interest against full fiscal autonomy.
When it comes to Scotland's interest, do you believe that the election result is a message from the people of Scotland that actually the Smith Commission doesn't go far enough in terms of the powers that the Scottish Parliament should have?
Well, the Smith Commission was an agreement between 5 parties. We said at the general election we would like it to go slightly further in terms of some of the welfare provisions. What I don't think should happen is full fiscal autonomy, and that seems to be something that's being discussed between the Prime Minister and Nicola Sturgeon at the moment. We will defend the role of Barnett in protecting Scotland's interests and being in the best interests of Scotland. There will be discussions about the Smith Agreement. It is a piece of legislation that everyone promised would be in the first Queen's speech. We'll look at that in great detail, but I'm not quite sure that people went to the polling stations on Thursday thinking about the Smith Agreement. I think it was much wider than that. We need a long time of soul searching to look at what happened, what the Scottish Labour Party needs to do to renew and become the party of Scotland again.
But Jack McConnell, former First Minister, described the Smith Commission as a shambles. He says it should be scrapped and replaced by a constitutional convention. Is that a position that you could support?
Well, a constitutional convention across the United Kingdom was in our manifesto, because what we've seen was a cat-handed approach by the Prime Minister after the referendum in terms of English votes for English laws and some of the things that he wanted to do constitutionally across the United Kingdom.
But Lord McConnell's position is quite specifically scrapping the Smith Commission proposals and looking at everything again in this constitutional convention.
Well, the Smith Commission is on the table. The Conservative government will have to decide whether or not it wants to take those forward. The promise that was made to the Scottish people was that the first Queen's speech would include the Smith Agreement, and therefore that will come forward in the Queen's speech on the 27th of May, as I understand it. And therefore we'll have to look at the position when that comes around. It was the position of the Scottish Labour Party to go a little bit further than the Smith Agreement in terms of some of the welfare provisions. It would seem and still appear that the SNP want to go for full fiscal autonomy, and it would appear that we're slightly confused at the moment about what the Conservative position would be. Constitutional conventions have worked very well in the past, and that's why we had it in our manifesto to have a constitutional convention across the whole of the UK to have a look at the position of both England, Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland in that context.
Just a very brief final question. You mentioned that meeting of MSPs yesterday looking at and discussing the leadership of the Labour Party in Scotland. Do you think Jim Murphy should stay on as leader of the Labour Party in Scotland?
Well, Jim Murphy is currently still the leader of the Labour Party.
Yes, that's a statement of fact. Do you think he should stay on?
Well, I don't think that's the kind of speculation that I want to get involved in at the moment. Jim has reflecting on what happened on Thursday. I would like Jim Murphy to stay on, but he has to have discussions with his family, and it'd be a decision for Jim on whether or not he decides to stay on. He's got the support from the meeting yesterday. He's only been in the job 5 months. It takes a long time to turn a party around that has had some inherent problems for many, many years now, and he'll do that job, and he'll do that job rather well. Whichever decision Jim Murphy makes will get my full support.
Ian Murray, Shadow Scottish Secretary, thank you very much for your time this morning. Of all the cabinet appointments made by the Prime Minister yesterday, the position of Secretary of State for Scotland must surely have been the easiest choice to make. With a clear Tory majority and no coalition with the Lib Dems to worry about, it was left to Scotland's only Tory MP, David Mundell, to take on the responsibility. But with the SNP taking nearly all of the Scottish seats at Westminster, he'll have his work cut out for him, especially in the negotiations to devolve more powers to the Scottish Parliament. Well, David Mundell joins us now. Good morning to you and congratulations on your new position.
Thank you very much, Gary.
What are your priorities going to be?
The priority will be to bring forward the legislation to implement the recommendations of the Smith Commission, so that the Scottish Parliament will have additional powers to make it one of the most powerful devolved parliaments in the world. And that will be set out in the Queen's speech. We'll move very quickly after that to bring that legislation before Parliament, and that will allow a debate and discussion involving all Scotland's parliamentarians as we move forward to implement that legislation.
So are those Smith proposals merely those just proposals at the moment? Could they be open to amendment and perhaps expansion?
What they will be open to is the full parliamentary process of scrutiny. People will indeed put down amendments. People will debate and discuss the issues. But the Smith Commission recommendations are the government's proposals for additional powers for the Scottish Parliament, and that's
but just a starting point at this stage.
That's our position. Of course, we'll listen to what others have to say. That's how Parliament works. And as I understand it, SNP MPs, new MPs, have said that they'll play a constructive part in Parliament, operate on that basis. So I expect vigorous and robust debate. When you put down amendments in Parliament, you don't always get those amendments passed, but what you do get is you get listened to for the points and issues that you raise.
But is the government open to going beyond what Smith is proposing, to perhaps devolving more to Scotland than is currently contained in that legislation?
The government believes that the Smith package is the right package for Scotland, the right package to give the Scottish Parliament the powers that it needs to,
so is that a line in the sand?
Be an effective and powerful Parliament, with a devolved Parliament within the context of a united kingdom. So we believe that this is the right package. But when legislation goes through Parliament, there's debate and discussion. That's only right, and we'll listen to what people say and what's put forward.
Well, in terms of listening, Lord Forsyth, of course, a former incumbent of the post that you now hold, says that a white paper on full fiscal autonomy is needed.
I don't envisage such a white paper. Of course, Lord Forsyth is a member of the House of Lords. The House of Lords will also be able to consider these proposals, and he and others will be able to comment at that time.
What about a constitutional commission then?
I think it's clear that there are a number of specific proposals being put forward across the United Kingdom. The proposals in Scotland, the proposals in Wales, there are proposals to devolve powers to Greater Manchester, for example. I think it's important that these specifics are proceeded with. I think after that, it is important to look at a way that knits together the different arrangements within the United Kingdom. But what I'm not in favour is getting a bunch of academics around the table and coming up with some perfect constitution for the United Kingdom. I just think that's a recipe for disaster.
But do you accept that the political landscape has changed quite dramatically after last Thursday, and the solutions that were perhaps in place last Wednesday may not be what people want now?
I accept that we're in a constantly changing political landscape, and within that landscape we've got to work to deliver what's best for Scotland, best for the United Kingdom. We've already, in relation to the previous Scotland Act, we've got significant powers coming to the Scottish Parliament in relation to income tax already in train. So we're in a constantly changing and evolving situation, but the direction of travel has been set by the people of Scotland. They want to remain within the United Kingdom. That was the decisive result in last year's referendum.
And does the election not tell us they want a different settlement than that was being proposed?
They want to see more powers for the Scottish Parliament. The government has a significant proposal for that, and that will be brought before Parliament.
What about Boris Johnson's suggestion of a federal Britain?
I don't agree with that suggestion, but Boris is now an MP, and like all the other MPs from across the United Kingdom, he'll be able to play a part in the debate and discussion on the Scottish proposals.
Do you see this election result bringing independence for Scotland closer?
I don't. From knocking on literally thousands of doors, I'm quite clear that people did not vote for the SNP on the basis of a separatist agenda.
Well, with respect, you only knocked on doors in your constituency where they voted for you.
No, I did vote. I did knock on doors in other constituencies, Gary, and I think people were quite clear that they were voting in the context of Scotland within the United Kingdom. They believed, I wouldn't have agreed, but they believed that SNP MPs could be their most effective voice at Westminster, but in the context of Westminster. So I don't believe it was a mandate for separation or a mandate for another referendum. It was a message, particularly to the Scottish Labour Party, that we wanted a more effective voice at Westminster.
You know, of course, but the SNP will continue to push for more and more powers, that the raison d'etre is independence. Is there not an argument for your party, the Unionist Party, to come up with a new settlement for the UK as a whole, federalism, or to give the SNP full fiscal autonomy for Edinburgh? Is there not an argument that says, in some respects, call their bluff, actually give them what they want, and that might become the settled will of the United Kingdom and would actually end up bringing about what your party wants, which is the cohesion of the United Kingdom rather than independence for Scotland?
No, I don't agree with that, because I don't believe that you should do something that you don't think is right for Scotland and the people of Scotland. And I most certainly don't think that a £7 billion black hole in our finances would be the right thing for Scotland. It would immediately bring into doubt the funding of vital public services. So that's why I don't support full fiscal autonomy, because I don't think it's the right thing for Scotland.
One of the priorities of this government, of course, is this EU referendum. Will we be having that referendum earlier than was originally proposed, do you believe?
Clearly, there'll be now, because we have a majority Conservative government, we'll be able to proceed with the commitment to the referendum, and obviously there'll be some debate and discussion about that process.
Does it make sense to have it in 2016, as one newspaper is suggesting today, to get it out of the way?
I think that what we have seen and we can feed back from our experience in Scotland, is that a prolonged referendum campaign isn't necessarily a positive thing.
What will your party's plans for scrapping the Human Rights Act mean here in Scotland?
I don't think that they will have any adverse impact on anybody in Scotland. I think people in Scotland share the concerns that have been voiced across the United Kingdom, that we've got the balance wrong between rights and responsibilities. So what the purpose of the Act that we'll be bringing forward is to not only enshrine rights, but also enshrine responsibilities.
But with that UK Bill of Rights, do you see that as applying in Scotland, and the repeal of the Human Rights Act would apply across the UK? Because, of course, at the moment it's enshrined into the laws of the Parliament in Edinburgh.
New legislation replaces existing legislation, and therefore the new Act will apply in Scotland.
Because there are constitutional experts who have real reservations about what that will mean here in Scotland.
I'm sure that they'll be able to play a full part in the debate and discussion of that legislation as it goes forward, and the points that they raise clearly will be heard and listened to.
But in terms of respecting the Scottish Government's position, and I'm sure that's what you want to do going forward, they, it seems, are opposed to the idea of scrapping the Human Rights Act and replacing it with the UK Bill of Rights. But you seem to be suggesting that the will of Westminster will be paramount on this.
I'm certainly very happy to discuss any issue with the Scottish Government, and that's the way I want to proceed, where if they have issues and concerns, we have a direct discussion. We don't conduct those discussions through the media or public posturing. We have detailed discussions about what the concerns are and how they can be met, either through within legislation or in other ways. And
so could they opt out of the UK Bill of Rights?
That's the constructive relationship that I want to have with the Scottish Government.
But is it technically feasible for them to opt out of the UK Bill of Rights?
On any issue, Gary, where they have specific concerns or specific points that they want to make, my door is open for discussion in that regard, and I'm very happy to engage. I think that's what the public in Scotland want. They don't want to see the UK government and Scottish government constantly bickering, constantly politicking. They want them to work constructively together for the people of Scotland. Of course, we're not going to agree on everything. That's the nature of politics and our political settlement. But I think we need to have a change in tone and a change in the way that we approach working together.
David Mundell, the Scottish Secretary, thank you very much for your time this morning.